Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of the show is to provide a forum for you guys to ask questions about chess and the chess world, and you can ask me questions right now on the chat bar on the right of the screen if you're watching on YouTube. I've got that in my own site right now. I see a hi guys up there, and I'm also I can get questions by email, at askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. So those are questions that you would give to me in advance because I'm not reading them now. So anytime during the week you can send them. It's best to send them up to the day before the show because it's hard for me to get to them in the morning. And the advantage of sending me email or sending me a message to John L. Watson on ICC, it's an alternate way to do it, but email is the best because you get a chance to really think about the question instead of just throwing it on the chat. You can express it more clearly, you can specify the question better, and I have plenty of time to look at it and to reply because some of the questions are pretty complex. So, and you can go back to other shows to hear any more details. Basically, we get mostly questions about openings. I think that's because people know I'm an opening expert of sorts. But we've also gotten questions about strategy, thinking techniques, advice for certain levels of players, and I'm trying to think what else. Books, chess books, which we haven't really talked enough about, but we should. Okay, so having said all that, I should say that the new indices of openings are up on my Facebook page, John L. Watson. I had someone write me and say they had trouble once they got there. They didn't see the listing. I think that's because you have to click on my name. Depends how you get there. But if you click on my picture where it says John L. Watson, if you search for John L. Watson and then you click on my picture on the upper left to get my main page, I'm not sure what Facebook calls all these different pages, but not the wall, but the other page. I don't know if it's called the home page or whatever. Then you'll see the messages that list the openings that we've looked at on every show for the last 20 shows or so. And I'll keep adding those every week. There also, every YouTube lecture has the names of the openings we covered and the ECO codes for that week. And actually last week I just put up, so that won't be there quite yet on the YouTube presentation, but it'll be there on my Facebook page, and very soon it'll be on the YouTube thing. So now, okay, so our usual procedure here is that I'm going to look at the questions. Before I look at the new questions that I've been sent, I'm going to go over some stuff we looked at before, in particular this time last week, but previous questions about which I'm able to have more thought about because they were on the chat, so I had to respond instantly and maybe make some additions to that. So there was a question last week about the pin Sicilian, and here we have a question about bishops or knights. We'll deal with that in a second. But first I want to do I'm going to do some analysis. As usual, I'm going to try and do a little bit of depth of analysis. I think it's something this program can offer about various things. But the first thing I thought we'd mention is the pin Sicilian, which I got a question about last week, and I dredged my memory. I haven't really looked at it in ages. And I got some of the main ideas right, most of them I guess. But I thought it should be more complete. This is perhaps an opening you could play, certainly in practice and blitz games and things, but even generally, I think White's advantage is fairly limited. It's more playable for Black than I thought before. So let me first start with a very entertaining win for White, just a very entertaining game. And that's in front of you now on the board, so let me show you. First of all, this is the pin variation. Black plays knight f6. You can look at last week to see what I said about it. And White generally pushes, and Black now usually plays knight d5. That's probably the only good move is knight d5. But let's look at knight e4 again. I mentioned this last week, this line, and I guess I got it pretty much right. Now we're attacking the rook, so the rook moves. The discovered checks aren't doing much good yet at this point. And so here Black can stay a piece up by playing that clever move, check, and then taking here. But White's coming in really fast with the idea of bishop g5 followed by bishop h6. I should, let me see what else I should be mentioning here. Anything else? Yeah, there are things that I showed you last week. Oh, one interesting line I didn't show you was queen a5. I think that was at what point? That's after rook f8 and a3. Yeah, so you could think about playing queen a5 here, because this is pinned, but the problem is knight here. Protects the rook and attacks the queen, and that's simply too strong. So instead of that, we have what was played, which is check. This is a game, by the way. And the problem is all the dark squares are falling. And this is what I came up with last week. I couldn't remember exactly how it went. And now I think bishop h6 is good. You can play it. That's what I showed last week. I showed bishop h6, queen, and I don't think I continued much, but after check here, oh, I missed this move. I didn't realize black had a defense here, which would be this move, if that's any kind of defense. But it's not really sufficient, because white wins the material back and has a terrific game. Nevertheless, this is not absolutely clear, because there's not overwhelming material or checkmate or anything like that. So the best way to play it, or even more interesting way to play it at any rate, and I think it's actually better, is to play the move that he played in this game that covers the knight f5 and gets ready to castle. So black's really stuck here, even though he's a piece ahead. Tries that move anyway. Not sure if there's anything much better. And then castles. So now rook d6 is one threat among probably many. So black tries to take the queens off, and the reason I'm showing this game is because it's such a pretty game. You can look for a move for white here. There may be many wins as far as I know, but it looks like the queens are coming off, and maybe black's got what he wants to and can kind of fight on here. I'm not sure if there's any other win besides this one, actually, because you really don't want to take the queens off. So this is a very pretty win. I'll let you think about it for a second, or you can stop the, if you're on YouTube, you can stop the tape. I mean, if you're on YouTube later, if you're on the archived version of this lecture, you can stop. Okay, I didn't give you much time, but the move is this. Very pretty. And now if you look at it, we have, oh sorry, is that, yeah, that's right. So if for example, queen here, then we have this move followed by rook over. Because, for example, if this move, check, and here is the only move, and then we have checkmate. So it's really e6 is very pretty. E takes d7 is actually a forced win. There's no, king has no moves. If knight here, we've got the same problem, check, and that's mate in a couple moves. Because if the knight comes up, of course, we have that, and if the queen comes up, we just take it and then play rook d8, mate. So that's kind of cute. And the game, oh, excuse me. Well, let's go back here. So e6 was the last move, and black came up with d6, only move, I guess. And that failed to that. We're still threatening rook d8, and black's trying to cut everything off, but that move wins anyway. Very, very pretty finish, actually. The idea, of course, is that if he takes here, we have check, and black's basically getting, I think that's the best way to do it, and black's basically getting killed here. Maybe he can try that, but he can't really block. The king is going to have to go to c7, and that's disastrous. Either bishop f4 or queen e5. Maybe queen e5 and then queen c5. That's right. Something like this would be made in a couple moves here. Okay, anyway, cute little game, and something that shows you actually that is the reason knight e4 is bad. I mean, that literally is a decent example of why knight e4 doesn't work. Well, you might say, okay, but what about the pin variation, the real thing that might actually work? And that's with knight d5, and that explains why black has to play knight d5. So let me show you that game. There we go. So this game goes like this. Now what I showed you last week, I just sort of was trying to dredge it out of my memory, was the move queen g4, and I think I said that would be the only way to really try to get an advantage. And I think that's untrue. He plays bishop d2 in this game. Let me quickly show you queen g4, and that gives you the line I was talking about. I even mentioned this line. Black gives up the exchange in this position here, and it turns out this is pretty playable. White supposedly gets the advantage in these lines according to the computer, but it's very close. Right now this is attacked, and this is fairly weak. So white's the exchange up. That's the best move. But then black has this move, hitting this 3 times and hitting the knight. So really the best move is for the knight to go back. And at this point, what's the easiest way to do this? Knight here, to put more pressure on this square. And then castles is the main line. You can play a3, but then you really can't play b4 because black just takes and then takes again and gets his material back with a couple extra pawns compared to what he had before. So the best move is this, unpinning. And and then I have knight takes, and then I think just queen takes here, without taking on c3 first. So this is a fascinating position right here. And this has been played, and white has actually won more games than black. But black has two bishops, he has a bishop pair, and he has two central pawns to none for the exchange. So black would essentially be better even. That's more than a pawn's worth of compensation for the exchange, pawn for the exchange, plus all these other advantages, except that white's ahead in development, and these guys are kind of stuck behind. So I think this comes out to something that's about equal. I think this is roughly equal and could definitely be played in practice. I mean, you could have fun on certainly on the black side. And on the white side, you might it's a bit of a slog defending, but you might be better. So, or you might try to prove you're better. And so you might want to play it on that side. Okay, so that's queen g4. So I was definitely wrong about that being the only move, although I did figure out something about the exchange sacrifice. And it turns out that the move that's more, you also sacrifice an exchange, black does after that move, but I think that's just a better move. They're both played quite a bit. This is played even more. I'm just going to show you the main line. The main line is like that. Now white's quite a ways ahead in development here, so black goes ahead and sacrifices the exchange again. And this one's a little different. Now if white takes, I think this position, this has been risen quite a few times, I think black should play queen here, and that sort of ties down, it threatens this pretty soon, it ties down white to that. Sure, white might be a little better here, white might be a little better, but you get this move in immediately, this central move. And the idea is that when you take that, black can take, because if queen takes, you have queen takes c3, so it's kind of a fascinating little line, and white here should probably just move the queen. And again, the computer likes white slightly, but I'm kind of skeptical. It's very close to equal at any rate. Definitely playable. So back to the game. Let's just see what happened here. Oh yeah, so white should make this very nice move here and try to attack. Just h4, h5, h takes g, bishop d3, sack, mate, basically. And now if black plays this, which has been played numerous times, I don't think it quite comes out right. Because after the queen comes out here, there's this nice move, knight here. That's a key move, cutting off the defense, and it happens to cover this square too. So now it really doesn't make that much difference what he does. I think this would be a good move for black, or one of the moves that looks good, but in fact after this, I think we're just getting a killing attack. Yeah, he has to take back, I guess. And then you just take here. And now if black simply takes back, we have a nice move. You might want to think for just a second about it. It's actually pretty clear, pretty obvious once you see it, which is just this. Threatening queen takes followed by checkmate, so he has to take it, and then here, and then mate follows very quickly because of queen takes here. So another pretty theme. Black has to be very careful about putting his pieces all over on the other side of the board is what it amounts to. Oh, and if black simply takes here, then threatening this, it's a very cute move. You just play here. Simple, slow move. And then guess what? If he plays here, you do it again. And you still have the bishop d3 trick. So very cute. Very cute idea. You can see why black has to memorize these things if he's going to play this way. So instead of d6, I think black should play this move, and does in this game. And white has to defend that. And that's the best way to defend in this case, just as it turns out. And maybe black could play here, but it turns out this is a pretty good attack. In fact, it's a very good attack with just h5 next. And you can look at that. You'd have to study that, but it seems to work really well. So what black tends to do is this, and sort of shows why what black's trying to do here is just break open lines. And again, if white captures, there's bishop takes, is the idea. Now a very nice move for white again is this move. Probably the only move that gives him an advantage. The point is that if this move now, you threaten checkmate, and then after this move, you're threatening to take the queens off, and you're full exchange ahead. So that's a nice little touch. So black plays that move instead, and white should take this now. Sort of gains a tempo in a way, and I won't show you the details, and then take this. But instead, he took this first. Shows how tricky all this stuff is. Wait, is this right? Oh, white played h5, sorry, first. and black took, and now white attacked that knight, and black should just play a6 now, as it turns out. I won't go into any detail because we want to get to other questions, but you can see, for example, in a position like this, that black has resources, and that's what he wants. I'm not even sure. I suspect it's even fine. This position's fine for black. He's got he's got his bishop. He's got the activity on the file. He's got pressure here. He has this open file, and the center's falling apart. White's center can collapse pretty quickly. So you can again sort of look at that and examine it and see what you think. But that's my assessment anyway. So the game went instead of that. It's not that important, that move, which is a mistake because white simply got a good game, except he shouldn't have taken that, as usual. Taking that is always dangerous. I'll just stop here. He should have played this move first and then taken it. That would have helped the defense. Notice that this doesn't work anymore because the queen isn't on that square anymore. All right, okay, that's basically the pin variation. Maybe I went on a little too long about that, but it's kind of nice to see some of these things. Now let me look at the chat. Let me see what's going on here. Which is better, bishops or knights? That's a discussion that went on for years and years and years, and anybody who's listened to me on this show knows that I think that bishops are better most of the time. Knights you don't really want to trade a bishop for a knight unless you have a certain advantage. The knight has to have some sort of advantage. So remaining either two knights versus bishop and knight, or two knights versus two bishops, or just simply knight versus bishop, the side with the knight needs to have either an outpost that he can put that knight on, which at the very least requires the knight to be exchanged off by the bishop, or have a space, a lot of space, just more space than the opponent, then that kind of counterbalances the bishops, or some other advantage, maybe a tactical advantage. Often he has a lead in development because white's taken quite a while to try to get the bishop pair, especially in the opening. It takes time to get the bishop pair usually, and then in return, the other side, black usually I guess, has, well, not always, will have a big lead in development, and therefore can play tactics and can play actively and make pawn breaks and create outposts. So, but in a neutral position, especially because the endgame, if you have a bishop versus knight with pawns on both sides of the board, the bishop's going to win a lot of the time. And if you have two bishops in an ending, the bishop's going to, unless the side with the knight has something special going on, those two bishops will win all the time. And that's a simple answer, but at least it's something. Connection very bad. Now, is that everybody's connection? Oh, I was apparently lost for a second. Sorry about that. Just always tell me if something goes wrong. Thank you, Shidki, for saying the connection is bad. Okay, good. I don't know what happened. That's a little unusual. I hope it doesn't happen again. We had problems like this early in the show, the first few shows, but we've not had any recently. All right, since I don't have any specific questions here, bishops in an open board, knights in a closed. Yeah, that's not really, I mean, that's true in an ending, for example. If you can have a closed position where the knights have outposts or the bishops are stuck behind their own pawns, that's true. But you'll find that bishops in a fairly closed or semi-open position, even when the knights are active, the bishops are often better because they can take all game to get out and get free. So that's a bit of a stereotype. The knights in the closed position, bishops in the open, is often not true, very, very often not true. So it's maybe not too good as a general rule, even though there are plenty of positions where that applies. There's also so many that doesn't apply. All right, so the Sicilian Maroczy bind is mostly played in the Sicilian Kan and not in other variations. Is it possible to play in other variations as well? Another variations of the Sicilian. Well, the Maroczy bind proper is actually in the accelerated fianchetto. It's not in the Kan, although I know exactly what you mean in your question. This is the accelerated fianchetto, and there are various forms of it, and you can play c4 here. And this officially is the Maroczy bind, is in this order. The structure c4, e4 is also called a Maroczy bind in general, but it sort of comes from this opening. Specifically, this is a Maroczy bind. In the Kan Sicilian, I was going to talk quite a bit today about the Kan because I've gotten questions about the Taimanov and Kan, which I really should be addressing because I've gotten them before too. So I've got a big section on that, but just to show you what he's talking about, this position you can play c4, and that's a type of Maroczy bind. Also the Taimanov, you can get a type of Maroczy bind, and plenty of other. There are actually fair numbers of other Sicilians, I think. Yeah, the bishop b5, for example. There's quite a few in the Sicilian. For example, this line, and no matter how he takes, playing c4 next, and often d4 also. you get a Maroczy bind. There's probably others. I'm not so sure it's that interesting for me to try and like dig these up, but there are several ways you can get C4 and E4 in the Sicilian. Just to mention something that I'm going to mention later anyway. So when I go over this thing, this Paulsen later, I hope I get to it anyway. I wanted to mention that the traditional reason this wasn't considered good was this, and I believe it was Carlsen. My memory is terrible, but I'm pretty sure that he played this move. And this is an interesting way to approach the Paulsen, because in the old days there were a variety of things to meet that kind of threat, and all of them were fine for black. But this is just a very nice little move, and it's a little hard to describe, but it covers two pawns that are prominent. It means that later that queen can swing over to the attack. It covers the E4 square, so you can threaten E5, and it covers C3. On the other hand, it gets in the way of your own pieces and develops the queen early, so it's not that easy, but it turns out to be interesting. It's for people who are asking what to do against the Paulsen, that's an idea. Now, there is another way to play that, the Kan Paulsen, which is queen here first, and a lot of grandmasters prefer that move. But there are ways to play against this too. I just thought I'd mention that as a possible anti-Paulsen system. And I'm trying to play the Colle-Zukertort variation, but don't find any plan. That's kind of general. You might want to send me, askimwatson@chessclub.com. You might want to send me a specific line or position in which you don't find any plan, because it's just way too general. The plans tend to be fairly stereotyped for white, which is why most people don't play it. In the Zukertort, we can do this real quickly. I do want to get to a lot of material today, but that's okay. In the Zukertort, for example, it doesn't matter what order you play all these things in. One of the plans is to play, let's just copy or something. One of the plans is to play knight e5, and then maybe even f4. I mean, you get your pieces out first, but that's one of the ideas. You get your bishop out and your castle first, but knight e5 is a plan. There aren't that many plans in these positions, and that's one reason the Colle-Zukertort isn't very either Colle. Now, is it just the Colle-Zukertort or both? Okay, so it's just the Colle-Zukertort. I was going to say other Colles have different plans, but that would be the main plan. There are other things you can do. You can try to get e4 in, for example, and you can play with c4. People play all kinds of ways, but I'd say trying to get knight e5 in is one of the very key ideas. All right, and you can ask me more specifically either by messaging me on ICC or sending to askimwatson@chessclub.com. QGA books can you recommend? The Risitano's old book on the Queen's Gambit Accepted was very good in terms of presenting a complete repertoire, and most of it's not out of date, actually, oddly enough. It's kind of an older book. There are videos on the Queen's Gambit Accepted. Trying to think what other books there are. Maybe someone can come up with something. It hasn't been the most popular opening over the years, but in recent years. Just for the record for everybody, this is the Queen's Gambit Accepted, and he's asking, are there any books to recommend? So yeah, I would even think about getting Risitano's old book and then looking up new games to supplement what the lines, because those lines very impressed me a lot. He sort of showed how to play against most everything. I would say that the line that's giving black the most problems is simply going into the old traditional, this kind of position. And black's going to play c5, and then white's playing this move bishop b3 a lot, this move. It's hard to describe why that works. Well, it stops b5 with tempo. I recommend in my book, Strategic Opening Repertoire, this move for the same reason, that if he plays b5 now, you can break up the queen side. And if he doesn't play b5, you've achieved something, which is you stop b5, and you're ready to go e4, e5. And actually, bishop b3 is kind of similar. You're still trying to go e4, e5, even when it costs you a pawn. So those are giving black trouble, and I think that's one of the main reasons. This is also, I think this is the recommendation in Avrick's book for white. But the question is, what are we going to do for black? And I don't know what the best source for black is right now. You should look at your databases. Take the Risitano book and then look at all your databases and correspondence games and sort of update what black's doing, because there probably is a decent way for black to play, but it's just, you need to be very specific. Okay, before going on here, because I don't see anything directly being asked right at the moment, let me talk about something else I was asked. There was a question, I'm going to try and cover earlier weeks. I put more thought into this question from a couple of weeks ago. It was, do you advise to learn the Spanish, as a 1900 player, do you advise to learn the closed Spanish system, Chigorin, Breyer, Zaitsev? Are there too many complicated strategies and deep ideas? could you recommend a book? I thought it was a really good question, and I talked about a lot of the closed positions. Now the first thing, just for the record, was that whoever told me online that in the Zaitsev, he implied at least you can't even avoid it, which I was thinking you could, that in the Zaitsev lines, for example, with bishop b7, and I'll show you what it is. This is the closed. This is black playing the closed Ruy Lopez. And we were talking about playing the Zaitsev lines with bishop b7 and rook e8 first, excuse me. So, sorry, why I keep missing rook e1. I did that last time too. The minute he plays b5, bishop b3, bishop b7, you're going to throw rook e1 in. Sorry. So let's do that again. I don't know why I keep doing that. The question is what about playing this move, which is the Zaitsev line? And it was pointed out that there's this repetition here. If you don't play f4, which is not that great a move, it doesn't really do that much as it turns out. But you could just play right back, and then if black wants to play this line, he has to play rook e8. So, and there is no way out of that, as it turns out. I thought there were alternatives, but the alternative was the one I mentioned, which is really the Smyslov line. It's really a different thing. You might want to play it one move earlier. So the real point is I was thinking about all these lines, and they are all kind of closed. For example, the same thing applies in all these lines to, let's go back to some fundamental position here, that to the knight a5, c5 Chigorin lines, to the Breyer lines where you play the knight back, and white plays here and black plays here, which is very, very sound, and Aronian still plays it. A lot of top players still play it. But it is very, I wouldn't for a 1900, I'd say that it is a little bit complicated. You'll learn a lot, but you also don't have much space. It's easy to get beat. So I was thinking, to answer the actual question, that most of the 1900s that I teach probably need more tactical experience anyway. Need to play more actively. Learn how to play more actively before they get too ambitious. And so I think one thing to do is just play. There are a couple of things I was thinking about. One is to play these classical sort of bishop c5 lines. This kind of thing. Sometimes called the Chokiev variation. Sometimes I think of it, it's not really a classical. Classical is the bishop earlier, but I like to think of it as a type of classical line. So that's one thing you can do. You just have to look up the theory, and you get more active play. This bishop, instead of being down here, is out here, and it's kind of fun. It's you need to study it. The other thing I was thinking you could do is just play an open Ruy Lopez, and just play for an open Ruy Lopez position. And this is the main line. It's pretty much the only one white usually plays. And then white's attacking here and black defends. We talked about it a little bit. And that's really perfect for getting good active play. It's very popular right now, which is nice. And the nice thing about it, as opposed to the closed variations, is that your plans are very active, and they develop, and they make common sense. You know, you've got moves like bishop here or bishop here attacking. You have knight coming back to get rid of the bishop. You've got d4 if you can get it in. They're really kind of straightforward ideas. For example, even if you play bishop e7 and castles next, let's try some move for white. White's got a lot of ideas. But even if you end up playing moves like this, you have still a variety of plans. You have plans like f5, and once this gets protected or that gets chased away, you also have moves like just bishop g4, moving the bishop twice to get more pressure on the center. And so there's some very standard ideas, but they're active and they're simple to look at. So for books, the Open Spanish by Mikhailevsky is a very thorough book. That's Grandmaster Repertoire 13 in the Quality Chess series. I think those are very dense books, but if you're going to play the Open Ruy, it would be great. It'd be a great book to have. Martin has a video on the Open Ruy Lopez, Andrew Martin, and it makes for very easy learning. For the bishop c5 lines, there's a bunch of sources. One of them is Shirov's videos on the Chokiev variation. Not sure if there are any recent books on bishop c5. I think John Hartman might have some idea about that, if he's still on. And so the other thing is that someone mentioned the Worrall variation, like if you're black, you have to avoid some of these lines. Well, in the Open Ruy, there's not much to avoid, because you get this far and you just take the pawn. But white can play an early Worrall variation. Now you can play queen e2 on the next move too in the main lines, but I'm going to just look at it in this order. I have a little game with this, which is worth maybe a quick look, because the Worrall variation is very important if you're black to know. If you don't know it, you can get beat really quickly sometimes. Okay, let me just show you this. There's those moves, Ruy Lopez moves. There's that knight f6, and instead he just defends this directly with this move. Now you can always also play it a move later if black isn't going to play an open Ruy. If black's going to play slowly, like with a move like that, you can play queen e2 now too. That's the we're all proper. But they can easily transpose. So let me just show you this game, which was here, and let me just show you how this goes. So these are all kind of standard moves. Black's playing very solidly, getting unpinned, and trying to really reinforce that square on e5 with the move d6 and maybe queen e7. You'll see that in a second. So I'm getting stuck here. Maybe I got another delay. I hope I'm not off the... the Urusov Gambit is, yeah, that's a very fun opening. Yeah, Fleer had a very, very good book on the open, which was probably the best, well, certainly best for its time, but I'm sure it's been, in terms of detail, I suppose the Michalewski book must be much better. It's bigger, and it's more dedicated. Okay, g6, the idea here is, again, to support that square. So it's a standard Ruy Lopez, one type of Ruy Lopez idea, and now he defends that. It could be that queen e7 would be better first. I should say instead of g6. There's little technical reasons, but I won't go into that because we want to get to a lot of other questions. So now a critical line that's been appearing recently is this d5 move, which is sort of illogical. I mean, everything else has been played here for white, but this one actually is working quite well, even though at first sight it looks very odd because you're getting rid of a piece. You're developing him to a nice square, goes to c5, etc., etc. But look at the bishops. The idea is white has a good bishop and black has a bad one, which doesn't have very many prospects of getting out. Like in the King's Indian, you can sometimes break down the center and get the bishop out. Here it's not easy to do. So let me just show you this game. That doesn't mean white's better here, but I think he is actually. I think it's a little tough. So now black has the King's Indian-like idea of playing, for example, knight h5, and here is a thought, maybe c6 and maybe f5, and that's what he should probably do. So white plays this move just to try to force a weakness on the king's side, and black goes ahead and plays that. Now I think black could still play this line reasonably well if he just played here. This might be even just perfectly okay actually, because this is still coming, this move, and when it gets there the knight is defended after f5. In other words, let me see if I can let's just pretend he made a nothing move, which of course he wouldn't, but going there, you're threatening knight f4, and the nice thing is that after f5, let's say white plays there or something, in order to cover the square, maybe play f3, and if black plays f5, now white can't win the knight, and that's another virtue of queen e8. So actually black can play this line. It's probably pretty decent. I suspect white's a little better, but not much. In the game, we had that move instead, and that's of course very weakening. Probably the wrong idea. And black tries to get a knight there, which is a very good idea, but the problem is that he doesn't have a light square bishop to support f5, which would then you could recapture with a bishop, and then you could play here. So I think white's a little better here. It's nothing that special, but I'm not sure about the queen c2 move. Black can also play for here and bring the rook over and get some queenside play. And I think I'll just stop there, but I wanted to show you that example of the Warhol variation. So you could even play exactly all these moves, but I did like that queen e8 plan better. All right, so what are we doing here? e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6. Yeah, the Urusov, and we could talk about that next. Oh, thank you. I'm still on, I guess. We can talk about that next week, maybe. I keep promising next week, though, and I'm not so sure I'm going to get to some of the subjects I talked about. I think the Berlin and favorite books, because we have so many old questions that I really should be answering, and I didn't get around to. So, well, thank you. How about the knight or bishop g5 for black with opposite castling? And about. So I guess that's a question about the knight or bishop g5. We've talked some about the knight or bishop g5. That's, again, a very general question. If you can send me something a little more specific, like give me a particular line in the knight orf, and I could show you a few, but then we can kind of be more focused. It's also probably going to be a very complicated, long answer because there's so much theory on the bishop g5 lines. I think I know which one you're talking about, but again, send me a little note. Also, I'll be copying this chat, and I can take a look and try and at least say something about this soon, either next week or the week after. I'm not going to promise next week anymore because I realize how quickly it goes. Oh, here's a question I really wanted to get. Another e4, e5 question. fact, there's two more, and there's a Sicilian question. I didn't get to the Evans Gambit, and I've now been asked 3 times about it, one by chat and a couple by email, and a couple of people wanted to know my opinion of it, and someone else specifically wanted to know what to do as black. So I guess my opinion, I've got a couple games, I'll try to go through them fairly quickly. My opinion is it's one of the better gambits. On the other hand, I think it's fairly solved. Now, Kasparov played it, so you would think it can't be bad, right? But he played it against players that I think he was sure. Kasparov was the most booked up player in the world by a large margin when he first played, when he was at that point in his career. And I think he was pretty convinced that people wouldn't play into big main tactical lines against him. They'd just play safe lines. And some of the safe lines are a lot of fun for white. So that's my guess. Anyway, let me see. I might just do 2 of these. Okay, let's just look at this one first. Okay, so first of all, what is the Evans Gambit? It's this. It's something you really have to know as black if you play the Gioco Piano instead of the 2 knights. This is the 2 knights defense. Gioco Piano is much more popular these days, so we've talked about both. So maybe you'll be particularly interested in this. If you play that, you have to know the Evans Gambit, because you can get slaughtered like all the 19th century players often did. Oh, here's one problem with the Evans already. I don't really think white's better after this. And that's called the Evans Gambit declined. But you can study it and have some fun as white. People used to just play here trying to trap the bishop. And you just have to study it and find some line that pleases you. I was frustrated because I wanted to get an advantage with white with the Evans, and this is already, I think, black's able to equalize this position. The advantage is white's gotten a little space, but the disadvantage, of course, is that it's a weakness too. And black actually would rather have the bishop on b6 anyway, because it can't be attacked by d4. So I don't know. It's not. It's just a trade-off, but it's very hard to get an advantage. And after all, that's really what you're after with the Evans. It's a complicated game. Okay, so that's the main line. And we're looking at this one this time, going back. So here we have d4. Now you can also just play castles. Let me show you castles. Black can play here, white can play here, and castles. And here's the difference. You didn't have to play d6 at any point. You didn't have to surrender the center with e takes d, and you didn't have to play d6. The point being that if he takes, if he plays here, it just releases the pressure on the center. So a position like this is just fine for black. Remember, black's a pawn up to begin with, so he can afford to give back a pawn if need be. Actually, this one's attacked right now, so you can't even get the pawn back. I guess white would play something like this. Black's very comfortable here. If he takes the pawn, pretty obvious, then black's still a pawn up in this position, and he's got good active pieces. Probably white's best move is this, as it turns out, and then black plays here. And white's getting a little messed up, because if he moves back somewhere, there's going to be a d5 move, which completely equalizes with a pawn. Well, gives you a pawn up plus an even position. So probably this is the best move. But again, you just play here, attacking the center. It's just not good enough. Bishop g5, you can just move the queen or play knight e7. So that's a sideline with castles. Castles is probably not as good a move, in other words, as d4 right away. And now there are a lot of lines where you take that, and there's tons of theory, but that's what white probably wants most of the time, is to get as active play as possible. He'll castle and play an early queen b3 or bishop a3. Those are some of the ideas of the Evans, by the way. I should have probably explained that. But this move is very basic. It's Lasker's defense. I think we've even transposed. Well, we'll transpose. This is actually Lasker's defense here, formally speaking. Very solid, gives you equality. And this is one of the problems with the Evans Gambit, is people found very, very convincing, solid replies. And what really happens here is that if you try to take your material back, you get it back, but you have this weakness, and black is well developed, and black's at least equal, arguably even conceivably slightly better after that move, neutralizing white's one most active piece. And black can also, since f7 is covered, just go like that. That's a perfectly good move. I would rather be black in these positions. I think formally speaking, white's okay. Hard to play. I think you're already kind of defending. So instead of that, white would probably play Oh, white would, yeah, would probably try to keep the attack going, but this is sort of a well-known line that after black defends, black's development's fine here, so white needs tactics. This position's a tough one. White usually resorts to this move, just to take, and also to get out of knight a5, forking pieces. So that's usually what he sort of tries to do. And black usually plays knight e7 here, but you can play knight h6 is a good move. And I think knight a5 is not supposed to be that great, but I think it's actually really excellent, because knight takes e5 is obvious, but it just turns out taking is fine. And queen a4 check, which is what most people will probably play, runs into c6, oddly enough. And that's because this is a reversed trick that we saw last week, except we saw black doing it, this trick. So you don't want to allow that, even though I'm not sure it's equal or what it is, but it's not. This is much better. I won't go into any more detail. This goes on forever. The best move of all is, believe it or not, this strange little move, and I just found that by the computer, by looking at the computer long enough. Don't know if anybody's ever played it. Presumably, it looks like trouble just giving that up, but in fact, after you take back here, you just stand better. And you're still going to be a pawn up in most of these lines. And for example, if you play here and then he tries to sacrifice, you just ignore it, and you're winning one of these two pieces. So that's a way to meet the Evans Gambit that's pretty reasonable. So white plays here instead of castling in this game. Black plays here. Now watch out, because if you play a move like this, you fall for the piece win with this. It's actually not totally clear, but it's definitely better for white. So I mean, I could explain more about that, but that's basically what's going on. So queen f6 is just a question mark move. And knight takes d4 turns out is fine. This pawn is pinned. It's probably about equal. Something like this happens here, and then black's stuck in the center, but he still has an extra pawn, and he's going to win some time on that bishop. Not the move I'd really recommend for black, but it's okay. It's reasonable. If you're trying to get an advantage, it's more difficult. So in this game, he plays simply, and white develops. It turns out that taking the pawn back just goes. Black goes here and threatens knight a5, and that's awkward. So white just develops instead, which is consistent with the attacking idea of the Evans Gambit. Check my time. Yeah, so I'm glad I'm going a little quickly. I'm skipping some stuff, but that's fine. And black plays as in the Lasker line. This is the basic structure: bishop on b6, knight here, and challenging white to somehow break through. White tries to attack on the king's side, that's on the queen's side, and maybe trap a piece over there at some point, which is a good idea. And then now, in this game, black played here, took on d4. I think the best line, there's actually a couple ways to play this, but I think the best line is just this one. And then white if tries, and that deserves an exclamation point, because white's very happy with this move, a5, and then capturing, and then playing here with a big attack, it looks like. But black, it turns out, is able to go here. And after white tries to blast open a bunch of lines, which is starting to look really promising, it turns out there's no real way to continue the attack. And you can check that out. There's just no way to really do much with this position. So after a4, knight f6, well, if you can't play a5, what are you doing with the move a4? And yeah, rather than going on further there, the other move that he has here is simply knight a5. You can equalize with this move, I think, just by going there and then taking on this square and playing knight f6. Maybe taking this later. You're not in any hurry to take that. Okay, that's sort of more or less just for the record. In this game, black took first. I don't think that's necessarily best. And then tried to win a pawn. Very greedy. He still has a pretty sound position there, though, because even though that's hanging, if white takes on e6, then the queen defends that. So this would have been the way to play, probably, because this is a little risky, taking on that square. White took that way with the pawn, which looks bad because it's double pawns, but remember, all we're trying to do here is attack. And so that prepares that attack. Maybe the pawns will start moving later. It's a nice way to play. And black needs to really curl up now. He finds a very good way of doing that. Plays here. And if black hadn't played very accurately here, I think he would have been in big trouble. Just show you a few more moves. Just to show you. And it's fairly solid for black. On the other hand, white has a bishop pair and nice active pieces. So this happened. I won't go through any more analysis. Maybe it's arguably, black might even be theoretically better because he has extra pawns, but white has the bishops and attacking chances. So black can't even castle yet, and so I'll just leave it at that. Okay. And the other Evans Gambit game I don't think I'll do because we're really starting to get short of time, and I think there's some new questions. Yeah, there are. Cool, Evans Gambit, thanks. We have oh, okay, he's trying to get specific variation. Well, I guess we can do that. We're not getting a lot of questions. Bye, John. Thank you. Let's look at, well, we'll look at this. E4, C5, knight f3. This is going to be a Najdorf, so I don't need to look at it for the first moves, obviously. Okay, that's the Najdorf. We've looked at it quite a bit here and there. By the way, I looked at Queen F3 again. I still think it's a very interesting move. Obviously, it doesn't give you a forced advantage, but it's fun and it's different. Okay, so this is the Bishop E2 line. Oh, it's not the Bishop G5 line. It's the very slow developing line. Here, good move, Knight B3. Sometimes people play Knight F3. That's become pretty popular. Bishop G5 now. Okay, best is H6. Well, I don't know the theory of this, the combination of Bishop E2 and Bishop G5. I actually just don't know the theory. The idea of Bishop G5 is probably to get rid of this and take over that square, so I would think that H6 wouldn't be ideal. Just offhand, I see nothing wrong with just playing here. Covering this, that's the normal move in positions like this, but I don't know this exact position. And the other thing, of course, you can do is play Knight BD7 so that if Bishop takes F6, Knight takes. I don't believe this is a major line for white. I could be wrong, but I don't believe this is a very well-known line. My first instinct is Bishop E6, and then you might want to play here, and you're not sure where the knight goes yet. It's very similar to a classical, usually the bishop ends up going here, which covers the D4, goes to E3, where it covers D4, stops Queen B6. Then you castle and you can play for moves like F4. There's also lines with G4 for white. But Bishop G5 gets in the way of all those plans, so I'm a little unconvinced if that's much of a plan. I can look it up. I'm often wrong. You guys have shown me stuff before that turns out it's quite popular recently, and then I just didn't know that, and so I had to I had to realize that once you showed me. But I don't like the combination of Bishop E2 and Bishop G5. Certainly in the old days when I studied a lot of Najdorfs, it didn't even exist. So, okay, Najdorf here, Najdorf there. Let's just see if I missed anything big on the chat. I'm going to zoom through the chat because sometimes I need to scroll up and find out that I've missed some things. Okay, this gives you some time to hit some stuff that I've missed over the last couple of weeks. And I won't get to everything, but I thought I could. Here's a question from Single Malt. Thanks for answering my question so thoroughly a week or two ago. You know, if you send me an email with your question, you're able to phrase the question better, ask for more details, and I get a chance to look at it longer and think about my reply so that it's more instructive. Sometimes I think my replies to the chat are not bad, but they aren't very instructive. I mean, I'd like to make this a teaching show to some extent. Tell all your students about it, anybody who has students or friends, because it is like a free lesson. And the questions I get beforehand I can really talk about. Okay, so he thanks me for answering the F3 question. Oh, I'm sorry, it was F3 here. I have another question about the Sicilian. What is the difference between the Kan, Taimanov, and Paulsen variations? And then he says very correctly, my understanding is that after E4, C5, E6, D4, that Knight C6 is the Taimanov variation, and A6 is the Kan, and that the Paulsen is simply another name for the Kan. And I agree with that. I mean, that's excellent. That's exactly what's going on, especially the Paulsen being exactly the same as the Kan. I'd just say for technical reasons, knight c6 is not really yet a Taimanov because it can go into so many other positions. The Taimanov proper, the original Taimanov, said that after that move, black played here. That's how Taimanov himself played it, although later he did play a6 actually. So the two Taimanov moves are queen c7 and a6, but of course black could do something else here. He could play the four knights with that we talked about and maybe try to get into a Sveshnikov. Or he could play just d6 with a Skahevenian transposition, very likely. So this isn't, knight c6 by itself isn't really a Taimanov yet, but it's certainly the move order you use to get to a Taimanov. And once again, we can talk about this c4 move, the Maroczy bind line. There's even a more interesting Maroczy bind line against knight c6, which is this move, threatening here. And then if that move, playing c4. Karpov used to play this. A lot of players played it, and that's another Maroczy bind in the Sicilian. There are quite a few of these, and whether it's actually called a Taimanov, I'm not so sure. But it is a variation that you have to know if you play the Taimanov, and if you want to play the d6 lines, you don't have to play d6 there, but I would recommend it. And it's a fun line for black, actually, that line. Okay, what was the other? The rest of that question. Oh, I wanted to show you some things against, because earlier I've gotten several questions about what do I do against the Kan and what do I do against the Taimanov. So let me show you a couple things, see how much time we have. I don't have games written out with these things. I mean, I don't have them uploaded, but I just thought I'd show you. There's this book called Dangerous Weapons Sicilian, which is by no means a new book by Everyman. And it has some wonderful ideas against the Kan and the Taimanov. People wanted sort of irregular, non-main lines against the Taimanov and the Kan. So I'm going to show you one against each. Against the Taimanov, which is this usually. Now, if you play a6, then you could argue that this line is a little better than it is against queen c7. Just setting up this way. Some people like to do this for white, and black gets a big center, but white gets very good development. Against queen c7, this is not much of a move at all because the queen is usefully placed, actually even on this square, but if black takes that way, the queen is already covering big squares, so you wouldn't want to take in most cases. But what in this game is very interesting. In this recommendation, the idea is that after, okay, let me do this one first. Which one should I do first? Okay, I'll do this one first. This is the Paulson move order. And what he talks about is playing this move. I think that's actually a really interesting move that most people hardly ever play. And now black has a lot of moves. This is one of them. Let me check my time here. Yeah, let's look at a couple more too. Just that's sort of the main move. Although most people play this because they are Kan players. So queen c7 is the main idea of the Kan. And white can just play here, just normal, easy moves, and just develop. So that's one way. But the more interesting, unique way is to play here. And you're kind of holding out maybe to play queen up and castle queen side. So more active than you usually get. And you also have the idea of playing knight here, which is arguably even more important. Just for example, well, one way of playing is just to play like this and play for queen f3. So it would go something like this, and don't even castle queen side, but don't commit to having the knight here where it can be attacked. The knight can come this way instead. So that's one way you can play this. Another way is to play simply knight there, nothing wrong with that. And now this move, which is the one I was talking about, trying to maybe go queen side, depending what black does. So, and a move like this, the whole structure isn't very promising for black. White's way ahead in development, and he's got to figure out how to hold on to that square. c4 is also becoming a possibility to really loosen black's control of the center. Maybe that's enough on queen c7, even though there's quite a bit more to do here. Yeah, because there's a lot going on here, so let me just see if I can do... and here's another point. If they play b5 instead of queen c7, for example, which is a common Kan move, to play b5 next before anything has become quite popular, actually. But there are two ideas here. One is just go there again. And the thing I like about this one, let me show you this one, and go here again, just like before, is that you can put your knight here, which is so much more comfortable than having your knight here. It means your c pawn is free to either support the center or blast through in the center. The knight can swing over to a square like that. There's no b4 with tempo attacking the knight. And there's also an a4 idea, which is to play a4, and after b4 you have some extra squares to play around with. Maybe a5 followed by knight c4. Maybe after e5 you're going to be able to play knight c4. So this is a cool way to play against the Kan. Now obviously that's very superficial. Let me show you queen c7 again briefly with this clever little move. And after knight here, now this time you probably do want to take it and then just develop. Okay, now black, just the reason I want to show you this one is because this is a standard idea in the Kan and the Taimanov for black, which is to get this center, 2 center pawns to 1, and even though you're behind in development, you've got center is worth a lot. One problem is the lines where black's already played a6. It's a little harder to get away with the structure in my opinion. The other problem is that this structure is better if the knight is here. If the knight's here, I think white has a lot more options, including c4 for example. So I think that this is a good way to play for white. I actually prefer white in this position. He just castles. Black can play a number of moves here, I guess. Let me see. I think here and then this move, knight d2, just covering the center. It's just hard to equalize. There's even ideas of e5 and then sacking a pawn with f5 that can be very dangerous. And I just find these lines a little difficult to play. You can also play queen here and think about g4, g5, or another kind of idea. Let me just show you another idea. Let's say black plays knight c6 first, which makes a lot of sense actually. And white simply, here, I'm going to show you that same position, but without the queen on c7 and without the bishop on e3. And one more setup you can play for white that's really worth remembering because it's awkward to play against when you're black is you can also play e5 here, by the way. It's not a bad move, but I really like, well, this is a good one with c4, but I had another idea. Maybe e5. No, okay, knight d2. Usually black will play bishop e7. Oh yeah, okay, here it is. Here's what I was thinking. Just play for b3. And Ems mentions this kind of structure. I don't know about the exact position, but I think this is hard to play. Just bishop b2. You have ideas of attacking on the king side because you've got 2 bishops aiming that way. You have ideas of attacking on the queen side with c4. You can bring your rooks anywhere, into the center, to c1, to e1, and you can rook lift later too. I think this is very hard to play against, just except that I'm maybe dropping material. Notice that I didn't even look at this. So this exact position I'm not so sure about. Let's be sure about d takes e. Knight takes, oh no, I'm sorry, that's not true. Check, yeah, bishop e3. Sorry, a little bit of a brain slip there. Gotta be careful. Okay, so that would be a nice way to play for white against the Kan. And since we have a little bit of time, no, I didn't get the books yet. So please send me something. Use the Boss Training Series. Very good. So send me something by askimwatson@chessclub.com, or send it to my ICC. Message me. Message John L. Watson. L as in lion. And tell me about some of your favorite books, including that one, and you'll remind me. I did promise to do it this week. I didn't get to it, but several of the things that I keep promising to get to, I'm not going to say next week anymore, but I will be getting to over the next weeks. How's that? Yeah, 150 attack. Exactly. Very good, because I told you I'd get to that, at least show that this week, and I obviously didn't get to it. So let me finish this Taimanov Kan thing. I'm cutting all these a little short because I want to get to all of them, but let's take a look at the Taimanov, because I was asked about that also. I've gotten several questions. Let me, oh whoops, I don't really want that. I want to put a new game in. Oh no, I don't. I want to just show this manually. Okay, so here's a Taimanov. And we already talked about this. You can play it after a6 and maybe transpose, but this is the main way to get into a Taimanov. And white plays here. As I say, there are other moves, but that's the main one. Main one besides the old traditional move that I talked about, playing here and setting up a Maroczy bind position, which I think black is, everybody thinks black's okay there. So, although you have to know what you're doing for both sides, and it can be fun for both sides. It's one of those great openings where both sides have plenty of chances. Okay, so queen c7 is usually going to be a transposition here, but that's the line people are playing mostly today, is this with that before queen c7. And there are many reasons for that. The main thing is because it's easier to play against g3 if you play a6 now without queen c7. A mysterious comment, but if you look at it, you can see. So here's the thing that Ems recommends in this Dangerous Weapons book, which you might want to get. Now normally white plays that with some sort of English attack is common. But in this case, he's recommending this move. And a lot of these things make sense. Black's making a lot of extra moves with his pawns, so it's almost like white can get away with a little bit of a loosening move in the center, especially because it has attacking possibilities. And the obvious way to play against that is what M's played in some game when he was black, but he ran into a very nice game here. Black played here, which is what you'd think he'd do, because the idea is that if white's playing slowly in the center, black's going to blast away with this 2-to-1 central majority. But it just turns out that this position is actually quite awkward, because that move happens and then that move, and white has a tremendous ending because he has all these dark squares. So that's extremely good for white. So that meant black had to play somewhere else, and my back arrow isn't working. So I hope, folks, that you there it goes. That was slow, very, very slow. So black in the game played something else here. Played knight takes, bishop takes, knight e4, and white simply castled. He's got a lead in development. That bishop's pretty awful. Good attacking chances. Black has a grip in the center, so he should be okay in the center, but he's not quite caught up in development, and he has good chances of getting attacked. So he doesn't want to lose his knight there, so we really had to play that way and exchange there. And he played this move, and white simply played here. And the idea is to play c4 next, undoubling your pawns, but also just crashing through in the center. And remember that after c4 takes, you're going to have f5 with a huge attack on the king, which the king is going to have to go to the king side. It's too exposed on the queen side also. It's exposed on both sides of the board. So white's much better here. So that's kind of a cool idea. And just to show you what happens on a more modest move, let me show you that. So maybe I should start at the beginning again and just show you the whole sequence. We're looking at the Taimanov, and this will be the last thing we look at today, unless I've got another question right there. Okay, here's the Taimanov, and we're looking at this move, which is the most popular order, and he's saying to just simply go ahead and play for f4, but play here first, and then black's almost always going to play this move, and then f4. And what if black just plays simply and plays just a normal looking Sicilian? Well, the nice thing now is you can go queenside again. The idea is to castle and then actually play g4, g5, which is a standard idea. And let me just show you one line, because black plays very logically against this. He gets out of the way of the file and plays a move that you always play in the Sicilian, or mostly play in the Sicilian anyway. And then he just develops. And here's the cool thing. White can play this move right away, which often fails to this. Now, if black castles, you just start marching down the board, because black doesn't have a queenside attack yet. Normally there's queenside versus kingside, but here white's way ahead of the game. He just throws all his pawns forward. I'll show you. Now here's a standard idea that you all should know if you play the white side of a Sicilian, or black for that matter, which is don't play too slowly trying to break through, because black's attack will get going. Just break through immediately. Pawns don't matter much when you're trying to mate the guy. And the idea is that if he takes, you're just going to go here. Then you're threatening to take. You've got that idea. You have two open files. You have this idea sometimes, opening the H file that way. And so black actually in this game, there was a game, played that way, check, king over, takes, and something like this, and just rook g1, and things are not going well, as you can tell. White's attack is just much faster than black's. Okay, so that's if black retreats. So instead of retreating, what black would normally do, that's if black goes to castles. So what black normally does against this idea of g4, if you haven't supported it first and lost time, is you play this move knight d4, and then you play this move e5, and you're threatening the bishop, and it's a good move to make e5 anyway, cutting off the bishop, and you're threatening bishop takes g4. But in this particular position, white's gained a lot of time, and he's very happy with this, and is able to give up the exchange or even do better in some of these positions. Play here first, and black will usually take back. If black plays bishop takes here, now we're on a couple pieces. We're on this piece, and if the knight moves, we're on that piece. And there's no time to take on d1, because takes on the f6 hits two pieces. So in a position like this, black would take, and white would just simply take that pawn with tempo. And this position is just extremely good. Here you don't even have to save your rook. You can just play a move like this, it turns out. because you have queen g7 coming up. And that's just a killer position, because after rook g8 you can simply take it. Okay, so that's the bishop g4 idea, and if he takes back instead of playing bishop g4, it's very similar, because white pins that, and this is a good maneuver to know too, pinning that pawn, which means that g5 is still an idea, as is knight d5, as is bishop takes e5, and this position is simply good. I don't know if there's much else to look at here. Yeah, I think I'll just stop here, because the threat is g5 followed by knight d5, and look at that knight on d5. Okay, and what's your, great question, because I haven't read it. This is the problem, I don't really read Sicilian books. I seem to read just about everything else, but most of my students play something irregular against the Sicilians, so I don't really have to keep track of mainline Sicilians. Kawowicki's large Sicilian book. I've heard good things about it. It's funny because John Hartman, who just left, may have written a review on that, or certainly talked about it. So let me see. I hate playing this for black because most players go for the Maroczy bind. Well, that's strange. In other words, they go for the knight b5 line in the Taimanov. Anyway, I don't have that much perspective on his large Sicilian book, and but I like that new publisher and what they're doing. But just to get back to the Maroczy bind thing, this is not a particularly dangerous Maroczy bind. It's kind of fun to play for black, I think. I used to play it, that's why I'm saying that. I used to play the Taimanov all the time. I think he's talking about this one. He doesn't want to play that because of this. This is a Maroczy bind structure. It's not, formally speaking, the Maroczy bind, but close enough. And one thing you can do in these positions, you just play what's called a hedgehog. The hedgehog goes like this, and then you play for b6, either now or soon. White usually sets up like this, black sets up like this. White goes like this. And there's some nice ideas for black in these positions. And white usually plays here, and maybe rook c1. One thing there's two things black can do that are kind of fun. White can play, it's black's move now. One of them, I don't know if you want to play here first, or rook e8 is very useful. Rook e8 it's worth knowing about, because sometimes you can play d5 and even sacrificing a pawn and you get a big attack. And if he takes a couple times, you play knight b4 and you're threatening that d5 square many times. So you can play very actively with the rook e8. But one of the basic themes, and the timing of when to play it, I don't think you'd play it now, but you might, is you're going to reroute this knight to that square. And it just turns out that's an ideal square against this setup. If this was a pure Maroczy bind and this knight was on a better square, maybe white could claim some advantage, but the knight's on a very bad square, and it's really not going anywhere that good if it goes to c2. So this is considered pretty much equal. What white usually does is he tries to bring a rook over. He tries to attack this and then bring a rook over here, and I'm not sure about the exact timing anymore. I should be, but I've kind of lost track over the years of the exact timing of these things. But sometimes black plays very interestingly. He plays for let me show you. He plays something like, let's just make a move here. And after moving the rook over somewhere, like there maybe, sometimes he plays a very strange maneuver. Bishop here, queen back, and bishop here to put c7, sorry, to put pressure this way and protect b6, which is a little bit of a weakness. Anyway, there's tons of things. You can look in the books for this. I could give you a lot more thorough thing, but I wouldn't be scared of knight b5. I wouldn't be scared. This is one of the Maroczy binds that is really pretty easy to play against, because white has no way to win material or increase the pressure immediately. It takes him a long time to get the moves he wants in. What white wants in these Maroczy bind positions are, he wants to play for b4 and things like that. Well, with a knight on a3, that's just not really in the cards. He wants to expand with his pawns on the queen side, and it's just not easy to do. So I would go ahead and study those lines and play that way. You know, I don't think white is a little better, and I think if you look at the theory, you'll see it's considered equal. But you know, you could. It's just something that people are not playing that much as white anymore, and that's probably a good sign. The top players aren't playing it as white, and they love little tiny edges. So, all right, thank you everybody. I got a good morning here, for 3 o'clock where I am in the afternoon. And I want to thank everybody for listening. Remember, Ask I Am Watson at chessclub.com, ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com, or you can message me at John L. Watson, that's on ICC, or by the way, there's the Twitter, hashtag AskIamWatson. You can go to Twitter, and no one seems to be using that, so I've kind of not mentioned that recently. Anyway, oh, this is a long show. We've actually gone on a long time here, a reasonably long time. So I will say goodbye to you and thank you very much.